Neil, hey Roy, Mike
Yeah.
Dabney here.
Okay, D, you're live.
Woo, see, we wore black. Okay. Hey.
Hey, welcome everybody. Nice to have you here at our client roundtable. You know, one of the things that I've really enjoyed about these roundtables is a chance to get away from work and from the world and to hear some inspiring ideas and words. And what happened last week violated that. And what happened was not only disturbing, but it was depraved and it was wrong. And as a company, and I think everybody who joins us for these sessions, we violently reject that behavior and what it stands for. And we apologize for not protecting this venue as sufficiently as we should, but we're working to keep it as informal as we can, and still inviting, but one that's much more secure against those kind of attacks. And we really believe it's important to get on with these roundtables as soon as we could. And we're really grateful to Neil and Roy to be very flexible and to reschedule with us today. And just as importantly, we're grateful to all of you who join us in these sessions and who've been flexible to reschedule and join us today. And we appreciate your expressions of support in the wake of what happened last week. And we're excited to continue with our next series of sessions. And I'll turn it over to you, Maury, to get us started.
Thank you very much, Dee. Appreciate it. Really excited to go through the discussion today. And just to set this up, you know, division, as we know, is real across life in general, in life specifically. But unity doesn't need to mean agreement on the solutions. Instead, it really should mean agreement on the issues that we face and our shared commitment to address them as a people. You know, and a people who share a common belief to live together in the pursuit of liberty, life, liberty, and happiness. But in a lot of ways, civility has gone out the window in some walks of life. We've experienced it, obviously, in this session, as Dee mentioned last week. We're experiencing it in other ways. It's caused us as a people to not trust our government, our media, and things we don't personally agree with. Our social media, and I think our ad revenue model for the news media format are programmed to do one of two things: either shock us or reinforce our beliefs so that we keep coming back and they can make money. The result, unfortunately, becomes an echo chamber that further segregates us and builds a wall towards shared empathy and really a belief in a better way, better because of the diversity of opinion to find solutions. But you know, today what we want to focus on is what is our opportunity in this business world, in the nonprofit sector, the other fields that we may be involved in. What is our opportunity to build and foster trust? We have Niel Golightly and Roy Spence, we'll talk about in a second, introduce them, and Carol Gestalter from Heart+Mind Strategies to share some ideas. But first, what I'd like to do is just set the context by sharing with you some of our data and some things that are going on the national scene. Now, I will mention that we have this, this data was gathered, the custom data I'm going to walk you through was gathered right before the inauguration. And so keep that in mind contextually. But first, let's just talk about a couple of these things to set the stage. Because as we try to find a business case for leading to new horizons, what's going on right now? There is a lot going on in the federal scene, right? Biden's done 28 executive orders. It's funny, some people think that's the most, but executive orders have been used a long time, but FDR holds the record in the first month at 30. We had just today a 5 a.m. vote in the US Senate, 51-50, with the vice president casting a vote on a new stimulus package that will now go to the House. The GOP decided not to take action on the Congresswoman Cheney from Georgia, and the Dems, Congresswoman Cheney from Wyoming, but the Democrats did decide to vote to remove Congresswoman Green from Georgia from the committee. So there's obviously posturing on the political front and real issues that they're trying to solve and how to work together. If you didn't see it already, the jobs report, there was 49,000 new jobs in January after a loss in December. But if you can tell from the graph off Wall Street Journal, several of these around, it does show that the pace of recovery is slowing, but we have recovered about 13 million jobs, but still not quite there. So what are people feeling? When we track this nationally, we have 1,000 adults and we've been doing this back since COVID hit. We can see what has transpired from when this pandemic started until today is an increase to the highest majority we've seen now and feel like the current events are driving us further apart. Now, you initially had that, post 9/11 effect of everybody, you see that yellow line way back in March and April. Hey, this brings us all closer together. But the moment states started taking actions and there was a lot of issues around that, we saw that. We've talked about it a lot in this venue. So people do feel like we're being driven further apart. But what's interesting, and again, right before the inauguration, we are seeing that overall the sentiment of concern and anxiety has gone down overall, but the caution that people are feeling and the worry since the election, since the end of the year and January 6th activities has gone up. But hopeful is now at the same of anxious across the country. And importantly, I think the highest number we've recorded in the last year of people feeling that they feel optimistic. Now, it's still only 26%. The dominant is, there's obvious reasons to be concerned and worried and cautious, but optimism seems to be going higher. We have these segments that we've been tracking throughout the year of what we call the concerned realist, the hopeful optimist, and the anxious worriers. You can see that the hopeful optimists have been growing. What's interesting underneath it, though, is historically it tended to be more of a conservative audience and Republican. That boost that we've seen is actually now more of a liberal and Democrat audience joining those in that ranks of hopeful optimism with some anxiety and concern. That obviously makes sense with some of the political issues. But you can see the feelings that are going on. A couple of things to point out that are interesting, though, is that when you look at generations, the negative emotions currently, where we've seen more of the change, are more with the boomers, the silent generation, right kind of there in the middle. And interestingly enough, now the dominant emotions are the same for everybody, but interestingly enough, the younger folks are the ones that have jumped up in the last few months, last few weeks especially, to being a lot more on the positive side. But look at what it looks like on ethnicity. When you look at hopefulness, you can see pretty consistent across the board. Confident, a lot higher with minorities in the last, compared to what we've seen in the past. You can see the yellow is white, Hispanic, and then Black and Asian across there. Anxiety is coming more from our Caucasian across the country, and concerned even higher. So there's different ways that people are experiencing reality, and that's important if we're going to empathize and figure out within our respective spheres how to connect with them. But when it looks at income, there's a dramatically different outlook in your life right now based on how much money you make, no matter all the other factors. If you're making over 100,000, you are looking at that at 50%, saying that you're hopeful. Look at how opposite it is on the issue of anxiety. If you're making less than 50, then your anxiety is much higher. Your ability to navigate and figure those things out is more difficult. So finding that path is difficult. On the ideology side, this is the shift I was showing, a big jump where you can see a lot higher gap now. It used to be the opposite on hopeful. You can see conservative to liberal. And then when you're anxious, kind of sitting across the board, concerned again, and angry, you see higher now on the conservative side. That's kind of tilted, right, in terms of what we were measuring at the last year. Now, finally, when you look at partisanship, you see a similar thing as the ideology. You can see Republicans showing the highest levels of concern and anger, and you can see independents pretty hopeful, just like Democrats, and you can see where that anxiety rests. So it paints a picture of different mindset, and not surprisingly, when you look at the results of this is now feels like a little bit older news of the control of the Senate, but it's kind of timely because today was the very first vote where you saw this taking place, where the vice president cast a tiny vote. There's kind of a split around the reaction to that of the country, just further evidence of the divide, where almost equal numbers being excited and concerned, and then you've got that quarter of the country like, I don't know, really either way. Won't spend a lot of time on this particular thing. It just demonstrates what you would expect to see, that Democrats, Republicans, opposite feelings on this, but the important independent group really leaning more toward the excitement of maybe things can move forward on this. Last thing I'll share with you is that the January 6th events now seem, I don't know, a while away, but only a month ago. And you can see that when people look at this in terms of what it meant, and this gets to the civility and the divide and what it means for us, is that if you ask Democrats and independents to name the words that would describe the people that came, it's overwhelmingly domestic terrorists. You can see with Republicans, they tend to be more rioters, protesters, extremists, and then you can see that Democrat piece coming on this insurrection. Different attitudes to this, but when you get into detailed questions, most people think and believe that that was an attempt to illegitimately overturn the results of the election. There are some people, which is interesting, that at the time you can see half of the country that believe that maybe this was left-wing as well. Now we know that the analysis and all the recordings and everything have been captured say that wasn't true, but it shows you where the mindset is. It's also, I think, interesting to note that there's a lot of people, and as you can see, 36% that agree, saying that there's a legitimate claim on that fraud and corruption, and that was simply voicing that point of view, and that it was just a peaceful protest. There's 24%, even after everything we saw, even the day before the inauguration, still saying that that was a peaceful protest. So different realities that people are perceiving, the majority of the country seeing. I think that hit a level where most people saw the problem. With Trump in particular, the only thing I want to emphasize here is there's still about a quarter to a third of the country that still are lock and load following what he has been saying. And so that's interesting in terms of seeing how you deal with the divide. The impact it's having, we've shared this before, but not surprisingly, when we look at values and the impact it's had on people, the biggest negative shift has been social order, right? So what do I do in social order? If I can't see a pathway, I start to look even more at my needs and my interest over others. Yet at the same time, the silver lining, the biggest increase in values is a concern for others. It's much smaller in terms of the increase, but nevertheless points to the possibility of those ways to find those. But trust has gone down in government. Not surprising, it's the lowest that we've measured ever, even the day before the inauguration. News media down, even a little bit of a bump that we saw in the fall. But most people do believe and want to believe that extremism is not the way to go. Moderate is there. Now, most of this has been filtered through a lens of politics and attitudes toward those things that we've seen, but the underlying divisions that go beyond that. I want to shift to Carol now to talk about some data from other folks. So Carol, what are we seeing on that front?
Good, thanks, Mari. I'll really start with the fact that as you know, as we've seen in our Heart+Mind Pulse data, we are really dealing with some unprecedented levels of mistrust in our historical sources of information, our institutions, government, NGOs, media, and really an erosion of the reputation of our country on a global scale. But I probably personally fall into that hopeful optimist segment that Mari talked about. And I think there is hope, and there is hope that's emanating from some of the good works that business has been doing over the past year. There are multiple examples of companies and industries that have stood up to prioritize the health and wellness, the well-being of employees, communities, customers, and looking for new ways to drive innovation in those spaces. I wanted to show you a few of the nuggets from the Edelman Trust Barometer. This just came out 2 or 3 weeks ago, and it really does put a fine point on this sense of a new mandate that's required for business to lead in society, and that business is truly viewed as more ethical and competent versus the government, versus NGOs, versus media. I mean, think about that. Both more competent and more ethical. So the public as a whole is really increasingly expecting business to fill this void of trust, to lead with facts, to be accountable to society, to be accountable to the public. These are large numbers, 2/3 of the public expecting business to take a role in society's issues when government is failing to do so, and to hold themselves as accountable. On the next slide, Maury, I also wanted to show you, some results from a recent CECP, CEO Investor Forum study that looked at the financial results of companies last year with respect to those companies that are purpose-based and those that are not. And they found through their analysis that the purpose-based companies truly did outperform the others when it comes to market valuation and financial results. And I think this really underscores the business value of the S, right? The societal role of companies today. And I think our panelists will address that point further in our discussion. We also saw in the Edelman work that, as we look at our internal stakeholders, our employees, they're putting far greater emphasis on the need to feel safe, of course, but also that increased heightened expectation on internal communications. The role of effective internal communications has really gone up. Opportunities to reskill and upskill. And those employees that experienced those things, where companies worked hard and demonstrated well in these areas, are more resilient. They're more resilient in their own performance through this crisis. Mari just talked about this, some of the younger generations and diverse populations. And I just wanted to mention again that some of our younger generations are those that have been most impacted financially through COVID. And it is so important for us to take time to understand their expectations, their needs, and their values through the things that they have been facing. And their voice is very strong. We see from the Edelman study that, the voice of the employee is carrying more weight. They expect to have a seat at the table at the company. And half of employees are now more likely to voice their concerns to leaders and stand up and even protest for what they believe in. So I think on the next slide where I'll leave you is that as we look at the impact of COVID, and really that was intensified through a lot of underlying issues over the past year in terms of justice and equality, economic insecurity, access to education, and expectations have increased dramatically for business to fill the gaps that have been left by the government and other institutions, to fill these voids, to increase transparency, accountability, and to truly lead with purpose. With that, I'll turn it back to you, Mari.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for going through that, Carol.
Great.
Well, we really appreciate it, and I think it tees up a lot what I know I've heard from Roy, what I've heard from Niel as we kind of talk about these. I'd like to first set up and introduce Niel Golightly. We've sent out a lot of information about Niel, so especially with us doing this twice, you probably heard us say this over and over again. But Niel, we really appreciate you being here as a leader and a Fortune 100 chief communication officer around the world, a consultant, executive coach, crisis response, reputation. We really appreciate the view that you bring to this from your perspective. And what I'd like to start out with, Niel, and feel free to explain any more about who you are as you go through this, but I'd like to ask you a specific question to get started. If you think about it, major corporate brands typically shy away from wading into potentially divisive social issues, at least historically, that's what we've seen. And especially over public political controversies. Is that different now? And as a C-suite veteran of two very large global companies, what do you see as the societal role of big companies in the aftermath of this election?
So first of all, thanks so much for the opportunity to be here. Thanks for what you guys do, and not only on a day-to-day basis, but in these venues that you've been hosting. It's great to be here. To answer that question, Maury, first of all, I'm probably going to reinforce some of the things that Carol already teased out in terms of what the data shows us. But to answer that question, I'm going to try to put it into maybe a bigger sort of historical sweep, and I'm going to go back a few years. And I'm going to go back very specifically to a moment when it became crystal clear to me that the Cold War was going to end and that Western capitalists were going to win it. And I'll tell you why here in a second. As some of you know, I spent a few years flying airplanes in the Navy. So I feel duty bound to start with a little bit of a sea story here. So one of our jobs in the squadron was to intercept Soviet aircraft if they were flying over the task force. And this was not atypical, but one of the very first times, this was over the Indian Ocean, one of the very first times that I was scrambled to go intercept an Ilyushin 38 like that Soviet there. You will see, if you look really, really closely, you'll see a little window in the back of the fuselage of that Soviet aircraft. And this was when I was probably 24, 25, pulled up alongside this Illusion 38. There was somebody in that window that was making some gestures to us in that Tomcat there alongside. And of course, because I was 25 and I was immortal, and I thought, you know, there was nothing standing between the evil empire and Western democracy as we know it, except for me and my backseater in our F-14. I thought, okay, this guy's clearly wanting to defect. He's signaling that he's giving himself up. We're going to end up escorting him to some neutral field. This is going to be an international incident. I'm going to be a hero, yada, yada, yada. Well, we got closer and closer and closer. And much to my dismay, what it turned out was that guy in that window in that Soviet airplane had a bottle of Coca-Cola. He was pointing at it, big thumbs up, big smile on his face. And at that very moment, not only was I just enormously deflated because kind of all that image of heroism went away, but I realized Cold War was going to end, and it wasn't going to end because we had faster jets or bigger bombs. It was going to end because the people on the other side of that Iron Curtain wanted the kind of life that we had on this side. Coca-Colas, Sony Walkman, if anybody remembers those, Levi jeans, cars, and so forth. I say all of that because essentially our entire system that we have seen under such stress over the last few months and actually over the last few years, our entire system has had big business, corporations, and governments really tightly woven together into a fabric of a shared vision of economic opportunity and activity, almost since the moment the original Dutch venture capitalists sunk a bunch of money into something called the Mayflower. That culture may have reached its peaks in the 2 or 3 years, or the decades rather, after World War II, when a generation came back from saving the world for democracy to make democracy and big business and corporations work for them. We saw a period there where business, government, even labor tacitly worked together to raise all boats. It was wildly imperfect, but it was largely successful. Now, what happened and what have we seen recently and what changes the role of corporations? Somewhere along the way, that whole fabric started to become unraveled. Milton Friedman, as we all know, made his famously autistic assertion that the sole concern of business was to be about generating profit. Carol talked about the importance of purpose. Well, guess what? Somewhere in there, the whole notion that big business and corporations had a role to play in the public good became decoupled. It was almost as if we were starting to create two different worlds, one of the kind of the corporate world, and over there somewhere at arm's length, this notion that there is a role for corporations to play in the public good and societal issues. We also, and this goes to some of the data that you just showed a little bit earlier, Maury, we started to see this sort of K-shaped trajectory of history where we had the haves and the have-nots and a growing divide between them, those that were anxious and those that were kind of riding the gravy train, let's face it, the lucky ones and the left behind. So along the way as well, if we look at this big picture and we look at how it all comes together and what the role of the corporation is in it, we have to acknowledge that government started to lose its way as well. We saw scorched earth politics, depleted competence at the top of the house, and most recently, outright public deception, shattered norms, shattered institutions, and for goodness gracious, an insurrection in the U.S. Capitol. So this is a crisis that's been building for years. I think it's a crisis not only of national values, but also a corporate crisis, and it needs to be managed as a corporate crisis. Because in effect, the problem is that business, all of us in the corporate world need those norms and institutions to be working well if we want to stay in business. And the system won't work much longer if we continue to allow the guardrails of civic discourse to be knocked down, if we allow faith in science and financial institutions, political processes to erode, and that kind of social contract to be ripped up. So as Carol noted a little bit earlier, we're starting to see that change. We're starting to see CEOs, corporates, CCOs, like in the role that I used to have, starting to take a different kind of calculation as to how and when and in what ways brands and CEOs need to be stepping into this into the space. We started to see it as early as 2016. We saw corporations boycotting some of the states that were trying to limit some of the anti-discrimination protections for LGBTQ people. We saw it after Charlottesville, when many corporations basically resigned, CEOs resigned en masse from some of the councils that the Trump administration had set up. We've seen whole industrial sectors that pretty much ignored the US withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accord and have been setting aggressive climate goals, working together with each other, with cities, with states, even with other countries. And then of course the dam really broke on January 7th of this year, when no less than the National Association of Manufacturers came out and called for the President of the United States to either resign or be removed from office for threatening the sanctity and the stability of our political system. I mean, imagine that. We don't have to imagine, we actually saw it. So yes, bottom line is, I do think that the role of corporations is changing. It is different today. And much to our astonishment, and as Carol showed, businesses now are suddenly among the most trusted institutions in society. And by the way, that's on both sides of the aisle. And yet at the same time, if we look at the attitudes of young people, there was a survey, I think in the middle of last year, where more young people felt positively about socialism than capitalism. If that doesn't suggest that there is a crisis in our system today, I'm not sure what is. So yeah, I think you're going to see more corporate CEOs, you're going to see more CCOs, you're going to see more brands stepping into issues like climate, like racial justice, like protecting democratic norms, because our future as businesses and our future as business leaders depend on it.
Thank you, Neil. And as I come back, I want to shift to Roy. I want you to be thinking about, I want to circle back to you on kind of the criteria for decision-making, Neil, to get involved. And then also, what's the business reality of making that decision? Be thinking about that. Now, I want to shift to Roy. Roy, as you know, you've been a friend of mine for many years. You kind of showed me the light in many different ways. We've worked together on many different clients and projects when I worked with you at GSD&M and even past that. And really, I know that purpose is a core of yours. I saw when we were looking at data that Carol was sharing in terms of the businesses that on purpose are the ones that are succeeding more, and everything you've done with the Purpose-Based Institute and driving the idea that it's not what you sell, it's what you stand for. I know that you really have been one of the original founders of that whole movement in marketing. So fast forward to today, if you will, Roy, and what's the role of purpose today in the world of marketing with this divide that we've been talking about that we have?
Well, first of all, great to be here. And Maury, we have done a lot of things together, and Dee as well, and new friend Neil and Carol, thank you for inviting me here. Well, first of all, it's really important to know, and you'll know it in a second, I don't have the corner on the smarts. And that's part of why I think that when you talk, Carol, about purpose-inspired leaders, we did a massive survey a long time ago about what are the characteristics of a level 5 leader, as Jim Collins talks about. Number one, protect your troops. The great leaders take care of their employees first. The great leaders, Herb Kelleher, I'm about to cry because I was 28 years old and he had 28 airplanes at Southwest, and he took me literally under the wing. Okay, we drank bourbon too, but having said that, he was the first one so many years ago to talk about his number one customer is not his passengers or the vendor partners. His number one customer was his employees. And that sounds trite now, Neil, because everybody talks about it. But during this whole thing that we've been going through, I might add one other thing before I get fully answer the question, you know, where I go. I always tell my kiddos, my grandkids, my friends and my family and my associates here at GSD&M, the Great Depression lasted 11 years. World War II lasted almost 7 years. That's 17 years that the American people back then had a Great Depression and a war. And we've been in this pandemic for 11 months. Now, we've been under stress longer than that, politically and all that, but I just got to put it in perspective to say, we can do this. We just got to get focused and double down on purpose. Now, let me tell you what I think about this. And again, I don't have the corner on this part. I grew up in a little town called Brownwood, Texas. My mom was, by the way, Carol, a civics teacher. Stay with me. She taught me, by the way. And she said when I came to her class as a senior, now, Roy, there's only two things. Don't call me mama in the class. And don't sell my test to your friends. Well, he's an entrepreneur, you know. But anyway, having said all that, and I'll get back to civics in a minute. My older sister, Susan Spence, rest her soul, was born with a horrible birth defect called spinal bifida. Got pictures of her all over my office. And back then, early 50s, if you were born with spinal bifida, which is a massive birth defect where all the nerves are supposed to go into your legs, they ball up in an open wound on your back. They're supposed to live to be 4 days, 4 months, 4 years. But my mom said no. And my sister Susan lived to be 49 years old. Every day in Brownwood, when I couldn't even see over a wheelchair, I'd push her to school and I'd push her back. And all my friends would go with me and we looked like the grapes of wrath, but it was all of us pushing my sister. And for 8 years, every morning, every afternoon, I pushed Susan Spence to school. And I graduated from high school barely and got into the University of Texas barely. And my sister got to go to, she graduated from high school and went to a community college, who, by the way, are my heroes. Go back to that in a second. I'd push her every Sunday. Now, don't get mad, all of you out there. And we'd listen to the Dallas Cowboys and we'd eat Whataburgers every Sunday. I was in her bed when she passed away at 49 years old, and I had that epiphany that all these years I thought I was pushing her. She'd been pushing me. And she would always say, you don't have to have wings to fly. You don't have to have legs to fly. And she taught me about purpose, and I didn't even know about it, what the word was, but it was about simply using your core strengths to serve a greater good. And that's not kumbaya. That's what conscious capital was built on, serving all the stakeholders. So I got lucky on this road to purpose. And I think now, more than ever, we all have to double down on purpose. It's the 5 or 6 questions that pretty interesting that we've done purpose work around the world. Number one, what are your strengths and weaknesses? And by the way, purpose-based leaders also fess up when they mess up. Protect your troops, fess up when you mess up. Practice the golden rule, not the one that who has the gold rules. Make sure your employees are number one, but also in a real sense, you got to understand, and I know, Neil, you know, Spence wrote The Art of War. I've read it 1,000 times because it has huge marketing. And Spence always said, you better know your weakness better than the competition, because they'll know it. The final point on this, purpose is also Aristotle. I didn't like Plato, but Aristotle became a great friend of mine over the years. And he said, basically, where your talents, not what your mother says your talents are, or your daddy, or your boss, where your talents and the needs of the world intersect, therein lies your purpose. So I would say we have to double down. Our business leaders, I want to see more purpose and less politics. I want to see a younger generation sink the partisanships and build a ship of state again. And you can't build a ship of state on politics. You have to build a ship of state on purpose. And this young generation, you've seen the data, They're more purpose hungry. The 40 and under is more purpose hungry than any generation. I think we have leaders, and I'll stop here. I'll go mute and just talk to myself. If we will have leaders that has a logo, purpose, not politics, that's where you go to higher ground, not common ground. We're not going to get anything you saw with 51 to 50 vote. That's common ground. You got to go to higher ground to get stuff done in America again. So let's have a purpose, not politics.
Roy, how do you think in a time when there's division around the political issues, but then just daily living, and we talked about the income level differences in your emotional mindset, different realities, how do business leaders make decisions with their world of their people, their customers, their investors, stakeholders, to leverage purpose in a time that we're currently in right now, when there is such a divide? And I would encourage everyone to also put in questions through the Q&A function, and we'll get through those. But talk to me about how it's different today, or how you would counsel a leader of an organization to think about purpose in today's environment.
Great question. I'm not going to go into social media and whatever we call the news now. I believe, and Neil talked about this, I think at some level, what I've been advising CEOs to do, you might not be able to change the world, but you can change your world. Here's what I mean. Are your employees talking to each other? Do we have the haves and have not in our own? Go look at this thing, and all of a sudden, if company after company does right by its associates, does rights by the all the things we know we have to do to make this one nation under God, with liberty and justice for all. Take care of your world. Band together with other conscious capitalists. And all of a sudden, if you're taking care of your world, the world starts to get taken care of. Second piece. There's a book that just came out from an Austin friend called The One Thing. And you know what I'm doing here. I was climbing up Mount Sopris 3 years ago outside of Colorado, and I just watched Apollo 13 for the 100th time. Houston, we have a problem. I looked around to make sure no one was around. I screamed, America, we got a problem. We only get to hear what they want us to hear. So I went back down and said, I'm going to go back to my roots. I'm going to start a movement called the Make It Movement, and we're going to use marketing as a force for good. One thing is, if we can start a movement in community colleges and trade associations, like you said, 70 or 80% of the American people agree with this, that every young person who's willing to work hard and take responsibility, every young person should have a chance to make it. Well, right now we have 15 million skilled up jobs. Jobs are looking for people. No one's talking about it. Well, I'm going to talk about it, and we're going to show young people and their parents, welders, you get a certificate to work. You got to graduate from high school. You can start making $65,000 at 19 years old. If you want to be a vet, I want people to understand that you can make a living and a life doing what you love to do, not what you're supposed to do. I'm doing the one thing.
Let's show this, Roy. You shared with me this, and if it's okay, I'd just like to share a piece about this.
There's more than one way to make it in America.
The piping that cools our buildings, I made it. And after proving myself, I make over $75,000 a year.
Thousands of motivated people like you are ready for a change and have a new vision for a new career.
A difference in someone's life today, I made it.
The electrical system that runs this building, I made it.
Community colleges, training programs, and apprenticeships are here to jumpstart your next move. You don't have to wait 4 years to make a good living and a great life.
New power for this city. We made it. And now I'm making a positive difference.
My team and I made an empty lot into a neighborhood. I didn't start at over $100,000 a year, but I make it now.
I made it.
I made it.
I make a great living, my way.
If you want to make it your way, go to makeitmovement.com. Earn a skill. Build a career. Make it. Dickies, Hunt Consolidated, and the Promised Land Project are proud partners of the Make It movement.
So clearly part of this is getting to the fundamental needs that people have and leveraging the need in society and connecting the two.
Exactly. Where your talents and the needs of the world intersect. Think about Aristotle saying that today. Your mom wants you to be a lawyer and you want to fish. Well, you know what fishing guides, I'm making this, not really, but here's a quick story and I'm going to turn it back over to y'all. 8th grade, I don't know if y'all remember cursive. Blue book on Emerson, who's my favorite, because he has up here, do not go where the path may lead, go where there is no path and leave a trail. By the way, there's no path here for America right now. So we might as well go do. So I turned it in, I got it back. I still have it, Maury, my office. I think I showed it to you. It's Blue book. 8 misspelled words and a huge C-. I'm 13 years old. C's were not like celebrated at my house, like good job, Roy. But my mom didn't say anything. Next year, I'm in the 9th grade and we're studying Emerson. I said, Mom, I can't do this. She said, do the best you can. I turned it in, I got it back. I have it here. Instead of 8 misspelled words, I had 11. The whole paper was red. And at the top of the paper was a tiny A-. I said, Mama, I don't get it. And she said, you can't spell. But she thinks, your teacher, Ms. Levacy, thinks you can write. And at 14, my mom cut a deal with me. I don't want you to spend another second of your life trying to be average at what you're bad at. I want you to spend the rest of your life to become great at what you're good at. You can hire a damn speller. My point, this is what the Make It movement's about. Find your core strength and then see what the needs of the world are. And you can both, and by the way, when young Americans, all diverse, everyone starts to make it, then we all make it.
And it gets to a thing that cuts across partisan divide or anything else, and it's getting to real solutions.
The real solution, yeah. So we're going to really try to launch this soon nationwide.
Great, Neil. I want to circle back to you. You're referencing some pretty important points and symbolism around what we unite around, and we've talked about the idea that a company needs to be able to understand where it goes, what it stands for. Roy's talked about the purpose side of it. Can you talk about, we've talked about how part of it is our own people, our own staff, our customers, in recent days, stakeholders in investing world, all whole new issue coming up around this divide. What's the criteria for making decisions in your mind for a company to be able to decide what to prioritize to really be a leader to new horizons in this space that aligns with who they are and what they stand for? What criteria and guidance do you find that's most helpful?
Yeah, so it's a great question, Maury. And I would say a couple things to that. One is anything that a company does in this space needs to be embedded in and organic to the way it does business. If these sorts of decisions that companies make are simply initiatives that get sort of tacked on by the social investment team or the sustainability team, then it's nowhere. It needs to be part and parcel of how the company does business. So that's the first criteria. Is it consistent with not only the values of the company, but probably even more importantly, is the company sensitive enough to, aware enough of the values of its stakeholders, starting, as Roy so well said, starting with the employees, and especially a generation of employees that's coming up with a very, very powerfully strong view that purpose needs to be part of not only their own lives, but the lives of the company that they work for. So that's the first criteria, is really taking a deep dive into the value set. A second, and this may surprise you just a little bit more, but I would say that companies are in business to make money. So everything that we've said about purpose, everything that we've said about the connection between companies and government and so forth, is in the context of the company's role. Capitalism's role is to generate value. It is to generate wealth. Now, the magic of all of this is that many of the issues that we're talking about, whether they're social issues, whether they're climate issues, whatever, upskilling issues, that sort of thing, there is a business case for those. There is an opportunity to create value by solving problems. So I would say one of the criteria that the company should be looking at is where can a company solve a problem? It may be a very, but it can go beyond being a specific business problem. How do I sell more of the widgets I'm making? It can look outside of its own walls and say, there's a problem out there. We can play a role in solving it. Not only that, we can turn that into a business of solving that problem. And guess what? If you can turn that solution to that problem, we're seeing it in Houston, by the way, just now. I'm working on a project in Houston around a energy transition strategy for the entire economy in the Houston area. And what we're finding is that there is so much opportunity, business opportunity in making that kind of transition to a low carbon, climate friendly energy system. So I would say those two things: really make sure that you're truly completely invested in the value system of your company and your stakeholders. And second of all, go out and find the problem that you can solve and that you can make a business around it.
Love it.
Roy, you talked about the ladders. What ladder are you on? Would you add anything to that or enhance it?
Well, Jim Collins, I think it was Good to Great. He and I became great friends. Always said, have a purpose beyond making money and you'll make more. That in order for purpose to not be kumbaya, we're a capitalist society. We have to make money. And if you can make money doing the right thing with the purpose driving you, like he was just saying, that's what this thing is all about. It differentiates us. And I think that one of the things that we all know, and again, I don't have the corner on this stuff, is that at some moment in time too, companies need to lead the charge on civil discourse. Companies need to have it inside their company with their partners. This whole idea of us versus them, which is just bigger than it's ever before in this country. We've got to put the us back in USA. And you do that by higher ground. You sit and talk to your people and the customers. I'll tell another thing. And by the way, I live in Austin, Texas, so I know something about this. Cities and towns have got to take over. The business communities and communities have got to go in and step up and say, we'll put the money in to solve this. Because the federal government is incapable right this moment. I represent the Air Force. I want them to defend us. But at some moment in time, mayors of cities and towns have got to have that business community saying, part of our stakeholders is the equitable financial stability of all of our citizens. So that's where I would just go, that companies need to do what he said. You have to have a purpose, by the way, and you need to have it articulated, not 50 paragraphs. Southwest Airlines' purpose: we give people the freedom to fly. And everybody says, yes, that's what bags fly free. Everything we've been doing, it's tough times for them, but then you have to have a set of core values that, Maury, they're on our floor. And freedom, responsibility, community, integrity. And by the way, they're in a circle, not siloed. Values need to be your ecosystem, because if you start violating one of them, what Jim Collins said, the flywheel starts to wobble. So purpose, values, and make money doing what you do best.
So Niel, what are the, I want to put you on the spot on this, like what are the 3 or 4 top questions that you think C-suite, chief communication officers or brand managers, those that are having to make these kinds of decisions right now around what to lead in civil discourse, what political issues, or what market opportunity at risk? What are the 3 or 4 most important questions that they're asking themselves right now?
I think one of them is goes right to the heart of the work that you guys do at Heart+Mind. And you didn't set me up for this. This wasn't pre-cooked, but the kind of data, the kind of survey, the kind of research that you do that really helps to provide insight into, how are our stakeholders thinking? What is important to them? What is the value systems that we need to be conscious of and respectful of? So that's one question. I think the second question is, and this is a very important one, Maury, and it gets to that very ticklish notion of how far into a controversial topic should a company try to get? And it goes to the heart of what is an acceptable range of opinion? What's an acceptable range of debate versus what is outside of that range of acceptability, right? So many political debates, companies probably should not weigh in on a political debate if it's a little bit to the left of center versus a little bit to the right of center. If it's completely outside the bounds of what we would think of as moral, principled, civic discourse, and we've seen a lot of that lately, and we've seen companies react to that, that's where companies can and should, I think, step in and say, you know what, this is completely wrong. This is outside of what we think is an appropriate set of values, and we're going to make a statement about it. I'll say one last thing, Maury, and this is probably going to be a little bit controversial to some corporations, but my last company that I was with was starting to really wade into this space, which is using the influence that they have. And now I'm talking about advocacy influence and more specifically government relations influence, using that influence in a way that addresses issues that go beyond just the typical corporate government relations issues, lower taxes, regulation, that kind of stuff. But for example, the last company I was in was actually actively exploring, is there a way that we could use our government relations voice to help encourage more progressive policing in communities where racial equity and policing run right into each other. That's pretty far off the beaten path for a set of kind of corporate concerns. But the view at the C-suite was, we've got all this power or this voice that we can deploy. Let's use that voice for good.
Yeah. I want to thank you for that. The last section that we have on here, I want to talk a little bit about, it's come up a few times, but part of this is civility and dialogue and discussion and learning together. We had a question come in from one of our attendees of asking, I think, provocative and interesting one. And that is, and Roy, let me ask you to take first stab at this. Do we really want to unite? Or is it okay to admit and accept that we're divided politically and then agree to pursue 5 or 6 themes to improve our nation, even if it means walking in different lanes?
Yeah. I'll take a shot at that. Whoever said that is correct. My mom was a civics teacher, and no matter how bad it got, she said, they call me Royito because my daddy was named Roy. So Royito, that politics is the business of freedom. There are a hell of a lot of countries out there that quote they're united. Well, they don't have politics. So we need to, but civility is important because as you can disagree all you want, there's going to be a moment in time where at some point, young people need to realize they can lead the ideal of civility. You can disagree. Unity is important after 9/11, and I did some. The country has to pull together to defend democracy in our way of life. But politics is the business of freedom here. Second piece, though, is I did a deal called America's New Front Porch, and got the Texas home builders to build one. And 2 years ago, McConaughey came into South by Southwest and threw a dart. And he said, well, we're going to take this front porch to Watford City, North Dakota. We went up there. That's not it. This is the new one. It was mobile. We had 700 people show up at Watford City 2.5 years ago. And I said, we're going to have a discussion about purpose, not politics. For 2.5 hours, we talked about our kids and our families. I found if you don't talk about politics or religion, 90% of the American people pretty much are the same. However, if you're going to talk about politics, I came back home and the Austin convention said, we want to give you this house. It's built in 1875, and we want you to put America's New Front Porch right here in Austin, Texas. So you can show that picture now. This is right across the convention, and we're going to start having discussions, and we're going to have Mama's Rules. By the way, the inspiration came from a country song that I love, Tracy Lawrence. If the world had a front porch like we had back then, we'd have our problems, but we'd still be friends. So that was redone completely. That front porch is just the way it was in 1875. And when the mayors come to Austin, hope they can, the mayor's convention, they're supposed to last year, we want to have conversations on America's new front porch. And let's see if we can have some, again, not common ground, but higher ground. So that's what I want to try to do.
That's great. Niel, what's your sense on that? And how do companies create front porches in their community?
Yeah. I love that story, and I love what Roy's doing with that. And I think it's a great example. I'm going to take your question and I'm going to take it in a slightly different direction, which is a very specific thing that I think companies can do to at least enable a civil conversation. And it goes to this whole notion that somehow we've lost touch with truth and with objective facts. And if you don't have some sort of reasonably accepted agreement around what the basis of truth and objective facts are, you can't have a civil dialogue. So what can companies do to encourage some sort of foundation of truth and objective facts? I think that there are organizations like newsliteracy.org. I think it's newslit.org is the website, that are fanning out across the country, fanning out into schools across the country to try to help people understand better how to read the news, how to filter out what's nonsense from what is really sort of validated fact out there. It's kind of basic civics. It's sort of, Roy, probably a bit of what your mom was teaching.
Yes, yes.
But encouraging, supporting, even funding organizations like that are trying to help a body politic really kind of grips with what's real, what's not real, what's fact, what's not fact, what's objective, what's not objective. Then you can have all the division of opinion you want within the boundaries of the real world.
Yeah. Let me try to get another question in on this real quickly, that, the disconnect that people are feeling with the political system, right? The lack of accountability to the public. Do you think that makes people more likely to pressure brands to participate in the public sphere because they feel more empowered as consumers than they do as citizens? What's your take on that, Neil?
I think it's less a matter of pressuring brands. I think it's a matter of people turning to whoever the adult in the room is. And increasingly, companies are being seen as the adult in the room. Carol pointed to it in the Edelman research that she showed us earlier. Whether you're an employee of a company, whether you're a customer of a company, whether you're a neighbor of a company, you're looking around for somebody that is a voice of reason. And increasingly, it's the businesses that are the voice of reason in this space. So I think it's less a matter of pressuring them and more a matter of companies realizing nobody else is filling this space. Whether this is going to be a permanent thing or whether it's situational because of this weird patch that we're going through in our history, or what. We need to step into that space because nobody else is doing it.
Roy, what do you think? Do you think that they're feeling more empowered as consumers than they do as citizens? Do you think there's that expectation of brands on taking the stand?
Yeah, I think so too. And I think, again, I go back to what Neil was saying too, is that I've always believed that a business, first of all, has to get its own home in order, have civil dialogue, do racial equity, build your own home so that you can now try to build somebody else's. You can also then build an alliance, because conscious capitalism was built on this idea of companies believing that shareholders were not just money people, the stakeholders, the employees, the community. And I think there's going to be a serious movement with this conscious capital or whatever it is to step out there and go, first of all, we're going to pay attention to our business and our customers, and we're going to make sure our employees are treated right, and we're going to do the right thing, and then we're going to get together and solve something else that politics can't solve. So social media is a whole other discussion.
But I wanted to ask that real quickly because we did get a question that came through I mentioned it in my statement at the beginning around the fact that we have an echo chamber, the algorithms push us to a place that just see our own thoughts. Do you think that it's time to be able to put more effort into regulate or guide to take a stand on the way that works, the way that system works in its ability to address this issue of solving problems? So Roy and then Neil will close.
I won't even go there because y'all get attacked. No, here's what I think. I think we, and it's going to be hard, have to be the controller. Put your damn phone down. Go walk in the woods. I've walked across America. Go talk to people. Go visit with people. I had a campaign for AIA, American Institute of Architects, my daughter. Look up America. So I know that's not practical, especially if you have like a 6-year-old and you know that they can't even eat peas without doing this. But at some point, consumers got to say, I'm done with this for a little bit. I'm going to go take a walk. By the way, walking is the greatest exercise you can get, because if you walk on purpose and put this down, and by the way, if you ever get in trouble with an associate or you're disagreeing violently, I found, Mark, you know this from being at GSD&M, I ask people, let's go take a walk. We go walk.
Yeah.
Put this down.
Neil, anything you add to that?
Boy, I couldn't agree more with Roy, and I would just observe that if you go back and you look at some of the history books and you look at the newspapers in the time of Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, and how just virulently,
oh my God,
violently, viciously opinionated they were, and how much fake news was being generated 250 some odd years ago, and you think, okay, well, this is simply that. Social media this day and age is simply that taken forward. I think Roy's right. I think that the higher value effort is in creating environments, whether it's in our workplaces, in our corporations, in our communities, in our own homes, where reasonable, civil, respectful, thoughtful discourse can happen in the context of a set of values that we can all agree on. And it's kind of starts there. The social media, the phones, got mine too, but those are simply tools. Those are accessories. The core needs to be really around that civil discourse and values.
I love that, because I think as one of the things that's kind of stood out to me through this whole dialogue is our spheres of influence that can have the biggest impact start with us in our homes, then within our organizations, our people. And then within our organizations, the market leadership we play. And if we can be doing that on purpose, the income will come because the leadership will be noticed.
Yeah, and let's think of it this way more. And Carol has done a lot of work on this. In a funny sort of way, the workplace has become the safe place for a lot of people, a lot of employees. That's where they can go, not just for the physical safety and the paycheck and all that, but for physical, emotional, intellectual, values-based safety. It's the safe place.
Yep.
Well, we're at the top of the hour, and even though it took us a week to get through this, we persevered. We went through. I thank all of you for joining us. Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Roy. Carol, thank you. And just from the bottom of our hearts, this authenticity, this human-centric way, we really at the core believe in the power of choice. We can make better choices when we champion the human spirit and the human reality. And so I hope everyone got something from the dialogue today. And more importantly, I hope you apply it. Like when you get off of this, write some notes down, see what you want to do. At the end of February, we're going to join again, and we're figuring out how we're going to do this because we have a different environment. But if you've never heard of Ferris and Rosie Jacob and Genius Stills, come join. Roy, I first met them when we brought them to GSD&M.
Oh yeah, that's great.
Paris. But we'll see you at the end of the month if you'd like to join in that. So take care, have a great weekend, and thank you, everybody.
Take a walk.
Yes.
Even if it's cold. Even if it's cold.
Yes.